Thanks for accepting our interview today. And what is your reaction to Turkey's invasion attacks to Syria?
Well, I'm horrified, actually. I think it's shocking that Turkey is allowed to do this. I think it's wrong. It's creating a humanitarian crisis. It's costing lives. And Turkey are essentially making a land grab right across that northeast Syrian border of at least some 20 miles, 32 kilometres we understand. Essentially it's an invasion, and they are pushing the Kurdish population back out of areas that they live in and have traditionally lived in. They're creating a huge number of refugees.
What is your point of view about that 120 hours, they call it ceasefire?
Any cessation in the violence in this attack by Turkey on the Kurds in this area is welcome, but it is not a ceasefire. It is only a pause for 5 days, 120 hours. And I am worried about what I hear. I think it's the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mr. Kasavolu, saying that the Kurds are still firing rockets into Turkey. So there's still, they're still talking like this is just a pause, this isn't over. I understand that Turkey are not making any commitment going forward to ceasing their activities. They've already taken a large strip of land, and I think they fully intend, if they can get away with it, to take the rest. I think it's a mistake on behalf of President Trump to have decided this was over. It's quite clear that his senior members of his armed forces and his advisors do not think it's over, and that he should not have pulled out. And the minute he pulled out, in went Turkey. Now, the Kurds, they're our allies. They were the troops on the ground because we didn't put any boots on the ground. They were the allies of America and of the European Union, of this country. And we should not be allowing this to happen. 11,000 Kurds lost their lives in the fight against ISIS. And thank God they did that with us and for themselves. But to just abandon our allies in this way, to the mercy of Turkey, knowing Turkey's aggressive intent, I think that's entirely wrong. America should not be pulling its troops out, and we should not be continuing to sell arms.
Was that a green light from Trump and Russia's Putin as well, do you think?
Well, it certainly looks that way, doesn't it? Yeah, the minute President Trump pulled US forces out, Turkey went in. I don't know what discussions were held beforehand, but it's very difficult to trust President Trump. He says one thing one minute and another the next. And he speaks in a language that doesn't lead you to have confidence that we can find a diplomatic resolution to this situation. One minute he's saying it's all over, he's pulling out. Immediately Turkey goes in, pressure is brought to bear, and then he says he's going to destroy their economy. I don't think any of this kind of unilateral action and excitable language is of any help whatsoever, and it doesn't build trust. Turkey needs to know quite clearly the views of America, the European Union, the UN. There's a unanimous view that Turkey is the aggressor. They should desist. They're creating a crisis, a humanitarian crisis. They're costing lives, and they need to stop.
Would you please talk about the humanitarian crisis in there, as well as we know in Serikania there is a big attack to a hospital, where is the wounded people, which is the civilians hospital.
At least 2 national hospitals and a number of health centres some have been attacked, but 2 hospitals and a number of health centres have now been abandoned because of the fear of attack and the risk of attack. So that of itself is a major problem. We know that there's thousands of people on the move because of fear of attack. They need shelter, they need food, they need to be able to go home. There's children who are very vulnerable in these situations. This is just very, very serious. The UN have called for proper humanitarian access. We know that the Red Cross has had difficulty getting access. So this can't go on behind, without the eyes of the world being able to see what's happening. It's very important that there is humanitarian access, both to give that relief to people that they need, and so that we see what's happening, and that of itself should be a deterrent to Turkey. We need to say to them, we see you, we see this is an atrocity. And there's many reports of the use of white phosphorus, a chemical which heats up the moisture on the skin. It burns and it prevents water being able to stop the burning. It's a really serious chemical warfare weapon, and it breaches the Geneva Convention. Now, Turkey says it's not using it, but there are so many reports of its use that it really is beginning to look like it is being used. So we need to assess the veracity of that. But if Turkey is using white phosphorus, then they have to be held to account. It's a war crime to use white phosphorus. In terms of, I think the first priority has got to be to make this pause a proper ceasefire, to get humanitarian aid in there, to get some proper diplomatic process going. Mike Pence has obviously started that and achieved this pause, but bearing in mind, his president's decision to pull out US troops has allowed this to happen. Now, President Erdogan is responsible for this, and Turkey. But President Trump needs to consider, is this how we treat our allies? Because it was no surprise to anybody that Turkey went in. Everybody was predicting this would happen. So President Trump should not have pulled US troops out until they were absolutely certain that our allies were safe. The UK were very slow, I think, to react to this. We were the last to react. I think it's right that no new licences will be issued. I think the concern is that arms sales can still occur under the current licences. And I think it is time to make it clear to Turkey that these licences can be suspended if this pause does not turn into a ceasefire, and if humanitarian access is not granted, full humanitarian access, and if there's any evidence that white phosphorus is being used. There was a time when people thought that that Erdogan was committed to a democratic process and system in Turkey. There was a time when he appeared to want to be a regional leader, but a leader committed to democracy. It's very hard to look at what he's doing in Turkey, to look at how he has acted throughout the whole situation with Syria, to look at his support for Assad and his alliance with Russia. It's very hard to look at these things and see that that commitment to democracy is still there. We know how he has hugely damaged the democracy in his own country, arrested many thousands of public servants, arrested members of parliament and thrown them into prison. We know many people have disappeared. We know he's damaged his own economy through this. He's changed the constitution of his country, which has made it less democratic and placed an enormous amount of unaccountable power in his hands. So I think all these things are extremely concerning. I don't think they speak well of him as someone who would aspire to be a world leader. I don't think they speak to a commitment to democracy. So no, I don't think his leadership is an example that we would like to see in democratic countries. And I think it's a great pity, because I think Turkey is a wonderful country, and I think its people are wonderful and have so much to offer. But I think he is stifling and smothering democracy in his own country. The British government can't go in and run Middle Eastern countries, but it does have a very strong voice in the world. We are a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We have a major role to play in NATO. We, despite Brexit, still have an important voice in Europe. And we do have an alliance with America. And so Britain's voice matters. I think they need to look carefully at what they say and when they say it, and who their allies are. Now, Turkey is still a member of NATO, but that relationship looks somewhat uneasy these days, with their buying the Russian fighters, with their incursion now into Syria and their alliance with Russia. That alliance is very important, and I think there needs to be some serious diplomatic efforts around this. But I think Britain, working with the European Union and with America and other allies, needs to be very, very clear, and with the UN, needs to be very, very clear with Turkey that its actions are endangering the Western alliance, they're endangering Turkey, and they're endangering the Middle East.
MP Joan Ryan, thank you for being with us today, and thanks for your comments about Turkey and the Middle East.